A few days ago, I took a break from making videos or watching videos, studying, and when I take a break, I will either go do some household chores or I read. And what I read is my book, Enoch, Jubilees, and Jasher by Joseph Lumpkin. And as my loyal subscribers know, I was up to part about Joseph. And when I read, sometimes I get the feeling I should do a video on it, and many times I don't. But the story of Joseph in particular, out of everything that I've been reading in this book, has every single time I go to read it, I feel like I have to say something. I have to do a video on it. And I did do a couple of them already. I'll leave the links below. One is Joseph and Potiphar's wife, and another one also about how Joseph was symbolic of Jesus, Yahushua, when he was given the Pharaoh's throne. It is just like Yahushua stepping up to Yahweh's throne. I knew I had to do a video about what I read next, but I felt that I had to finish the last 3 videos that I had done first, since I was in the middle of them and it really needed a conclusion put up. While I was working on the last 3 videos, Stephen Banoon was reading the same thing in Jasher, and he put up an 1.5-hour video on it. I highly suggest you check it out. Though he does read some of what I read in the previous videos, and I will read now, I don't know about his scapegoat theory, but he pointed out a lot of symbolism, and I'm going to point out the main things I want you to know in this video series. His video is called Why Are Rabbis Among Harlots? And I'll leave the link below to that. But because he was working on this video, it is a second confirmation to me that the interpretation is true and very, very important. He definitely wants this getting out. So I'm going to read some of the book of Jasher, the one from Joseph Lumpkin, and I'll put a different translation up on the screen as I always do. Again, always pray for discernment. The book of Jasher is discussed a couple of times in the Bible, but you can always pray for discernment about it. If you don't believe it, then don't watch. But, you know, Stephen Banoon and me doing this, the past couple of videos that I have done on this previously, I really feel like God's really trying to get the point home to people that Joseph is a shadow of Jesus, Yahushua, and there is a lot of synchronicity, a lot of really important stuff in here. So I'm going to read chapter 50. Verse 7. At the revolution of the year, in the 2nd year of Joseph's reigning over Egypt, the Lord gave great plenty throughout the land for 7 years, as Joseph had spoken. For the Lord blessed all the produce of the earth in those days for 7 years. They ate and were greatly satisfied. And Joseph at that time had officers under him, and they collected all the food of the good years and heaped corn year by year, and they placed it in the treasures of Joseph. I feel that that may be representative of the Christians who are collecting all the good food in the good years and storing their treasures up in heaven. Verse 9. At any time when they gathered the food, Joseph commanded that they should bring the corn in the ears, and also bring with it some of the soil of the field, so that it would not spoil. And Joseph did according to this year by year, and he heaped up corn like the sand of the sea for abundance, for his stores were immense, and could not be numbered for abundance. Also all the inhabitants of Egypt gathered all sorts of food in their stores in great abundance during the 7 good years, but they did not do it as Joseph did. And so this may be representative of those, maybe even Christians, who are trying to store up their earthly treasures. They're not doing it the way they were taught to by doing God's will. They're doing it the way they want to. The do what thou wilt is the law, the satanic law. So they're trying to store up treasures, but they're not doing it the right way. All right, verse 12. All the food which Joseph and the Egyptians had gathered during the 7 years of plenty was secured for the land in stores for the 7 years of famine, for the support of the whole land. And the inhabitants of Egypt filled each man his store and his concealed place with corn to be for support during the famine. And Joseph placed all the food that he had gathered in all the cities of Egypt, and he closed all the stores and placed sentinels over them. Joseph's wife Osnath, the daughter of Potiphar, gave birth to him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and Joseph was 34 years old when he had them. And the lads grew up, and they followed in his ways and in his instructions. They did not deviate from the way which their father taught them, either to the right or left. And the Lord was with the lads, and they grew up and had understanding and skill in all wisdom and in all the affairs of government. All the king's officers and his great men of the inhabitants of Egypt honored the lads, and they were brought up among the king's children. This may be representative of the brothers and sisters in Christ. Verse 18, the 7 years of plenty that were throughout the land were at an end. The 7 years of famine came after them, as Joseph had spoken, and the famine spread throughout the land. This may be representative of the time of tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. Verse 19, all the people of Egypt saw that the famine had begun in the land of Egypt, and all the people of Egypt opened their stores of corn, for the famine hung over them. And they found all the food that was in their stores full of vermin and not fit to eat. And the famine stayed throughout the land. All the inhabitants of Egypt came and cried before Pharaoh, for the famine was heavy on them. As I said, if these are representative of people, even Christians, who are trying to prepare for the end of days coming up, but they're not doing it by doing God's will, and they're doing their own will, trying to do it their own way, then everything that they have stored up will become worthless because it'll be full of vermin. All right, verse 21. And they said to Pharaoh, give food to your servants. Why shall we die through hunger before your eyes, even we and our little ones? And Pharaoh answered them, saying, and why do you cry to me? Did not Joseph command that the corn should be laid up during the 7 years of plenty for the years of famine? Why did you not listen to his voice? Again, this is kind of hearkening to Jesus telling us to store up our treasures in heaven where they won't be shaken. Verse 23, and the people of Egypt answered the king, saying, as your soul lives, our lord, your servants have done all that Joseph ordered, for your servants also gathered in all the produce of their fields during the 7 years of plenty, and laid it in the stores to this day. See, these seem to be people who they were trying to do the right thing, but they didn't do it the right way. They weren't doing it the way Joseph told them to do it, by doing God's will. So they were trying to do it their own way, and they weren't really storing up treasures in heaven. They were storing up treasures on earth, which can be destroyed. Verse 24, and when the famine prevailed over your servants, we opened our stores, and behold, all our produce was filled with vermin and was not fit for food. When the king heard all that had befallen the inhabitants of Egypt, the king was greatly afraid on account of the famine, and he was much terrified. The king answered the people of Egypt, saying, since all this has happened to you, go to Joseph, do whatever he shall say to you, do not go contrary to his commands. And all the people of Egypt went forth and came to Joseph and said to him, give to us food, for why shall we die before you through hunger? We gathered in our produce during the 7 years as you did command, and we put it in store, and thus has it happened to us. And when Joseph heard all the words of the people of Egypt and what had happened to them, Joseph opened all his stores of the produce, and he sold it to the people of Egypt. This is reminding me of when Jesus tells people in the letters to the 7 churches to buy gold tried in the fire. They have to buy during this time. This could be the hypocrite Christians who were left behind, who have to buy their way, which when you're talking about buying oil and things in the Bible, it's talking about sacrificing your will, and all the things that you have to sacrifice is what you have paid to do God's will for your heavenly treasures. So that might be why he sold the piled up food to the people of Egypt, even though they had been preparing for it. All right, verse 28. And the famine stayed throughout the land, and the famine was in all countries, but in the land of Egypt there was produce for sale. All the inhabitants of Egypt came to Joseph to buy corn, for the famine hung over them, and all their corn was spoiled, and Joseph daily sold it to all the people of Egypt. And all the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, and the Philistines, and those beyond the Jordan, and the children of the east, and all the cities of the lands far and near, heard that there was corn in Egypt, and they all came to Egypt to buy corn, for the famine hung over them. So this can be representative of the time of Jacob's trouble and tribulation, when even people who didn't believe in Jesus Christ, they were, the Gentiles, they didn't come to him beforehand. Now they are all coming to him because they see what time it is, and they see that they are in need. All right, verse 31. Joseph opened the stores of corn and placed officers over them, and they daily stood and sold to all that came. Joseph knew that his brothers also would come to Egypt to buy corn, for the famine spread throughout the earth. And Joseph commanded all his people that they should cause it to be announced throughout the land of Egypt, saying, It is the pleasure of the king, of his second, and of their great men, that any person who wishes to buy corn in Egypt shall not send his servants to Egypt to purchase, but his sons. Also any Egyptian or Canaanite who shall come from any of the stores from buying corn in Egypt, if he goes and sells it throughout the land, he shall die. For no one shall buy but for the support of his household. And any man leading 2 or 3 beasts shall die, for a man shall only lead his own beast. Joseph placed sentinels at the gates of Egypt and commanded them, saying, Any person who may come to buy corn, permit him not to enter until his name and the name of his father and the name of his father's father be written down, whatever is written by day. Send their names to me in the evening, that I may know their names. And Joseph placed officers throughout the land of Egypt. He commanded them to do all these things. Joseph did all these things and made these standards in order that he might know when his brothers would come to Egypt to buy corn. Joseph's people caused it daily to be announced in Egypt according to these words and standards which Joseph had commanded. And all the inhabitants of the east and west country and of all the earth heard of the rules and regulations which Joseph had enacted in Egypt. And the inhabitants of the extreme parts of the earth came, and they bought corn in Egypt day after day, and they went away. All the officers of Egypt did as Joseph had commanded, and all that came to Egypt to buy corn, the gatekeepers would write their names and their fathers' names, and daily bring them in the evening to Joseph. And so this also represents the fact that the people of Egypt were fed first, and the Joseph's brethren, or Yahushua's brethren, the Jews, were still starving. They were in famine, and they come later to buy food. So Yahushua feeds the Gentiles before he feeds the Jews. I'm going to pick up on this in the next video.